All right, we'll get underway. We acknowledge the Bangla people, the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, and pay our respects to the elders past and present, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are present today. So welcome everybody. We have an apology from Peter Klobuchar, but we have another Pete in, so Peter Border. So welcome Pete as the council representative. We have some guests in the room from BDO, both Kiffin and Paul. So welcome, guys. Meeting. Declaration of members' conflict of interest. Anybody got any change or any conflict with the items being considered today? No. Laurie, I take your silence as a no.
No.
Okay. Thank you for that. We have the minutes. The minutes were issued on I think the 1st of August. So the minutes that sit in here at the moment don't have those confidential matters, but the confidential matters were included in the link for the 1st of August. Going forward, we will have the full minutes in our pack, speaking to Kathy, so that can be done. Okay, so what we will do is confirm the minutes subject to the inclusion of the confidential matters. So our standard comment there, if we could please. So I have a mover. Thank you, Pat. Seconder, thanks, Laurie. All those in favour? That is passed. Okay, we'll move into the jug decides to boil. Sugar sense, Phil. We'll move into the standing items. Kathy, I might hand over to you if you like to walk through the various annexures.
Yes, thank you through the chair. I will take the report as read. As you can see, Annexure A, many of the items have now actually been completed. And I'll take any questions on those once I've concluded talking. Annexure B does not actually include any items from the cybersecurity review that was undertaken and presented to the committee at the last meeting. So we will ensure that confidential items are included in Annexure B from that review that was undertaken earlier this year. Annexure C will be replaced following the committee's consideration of its schedule for meetings next year. Annexure D, a number of the items that were originally scheduled for the October 23 meeting have not been included on the agenda for this meeting, and I'll just work through a couple of those. So at item 7.8 on page 24, there is a cross there. We do actually have the joint workshop scheduled with the council for this evening, and the topic for that joint workshop is around the setting of council's risk appetite. The review of the committee meeting procedures at 7.10. We'll come to the next meeting with that. The reason why it's not on this particular committee meeting agenda is that the council itself is reviewing fully its code of practice procedures at meetings as we speak. A report will be going to the October council meeting around that, and so following the council's adoption of their code of practice, we'll use that then as the base for review by this committee in terms of the meeting procedures. So that will come through to the February meeting in 2024. The next item in relation to 10.1 and the review of strategic management plans, etc. There is no report at this moment in time for the committee's consideration. We are still working through the framework of review for our suite of strategic management plans, and we definitely anticipate that our first report will come through to the February meeting. What I will report to the committee, though, in that regard, council held its second What's the Future workshop, not last week, the week before last, on the Thursday evening. And that workshop was largely a continuation of the body of work commenced in April. However, what we did in taking the feedback from the audit committee when we presented the outcomes of the April workshop around whether or not that body of work and that body of feedback we had received back in April was actually going to take Whyalla to Whyalla 2.0 or not. And we recognised that that feedback was not much the same, but it wasn't actually the strategic thinking from the residents that could potentially take the city to a stratospheric level in terms of its future. So we held a second workshop on Thursday week ago. That workshop was fabulous. We do have, and I think Grant, you were online. We do have some much more visionary feedback that has come through from the community from that workshop, and that will now shape further our next steps in our community plan. So at the next committee meeting, we will, I'm hopeful of, have much more to report in terms of strategic management, the strategic management framework, perhaps even a first draft of the community plan as we move forward. The next item on here, rating review considerations. Because we are midway through the rating review, we felt it wasn't, we weren't far enough advanced in terms of the rating review to bring a report through to the committee, but certainly we will be much further advanced with the next committee meeting in February, so that will come through. Prudential management, the prudential management policy, that policy actually came to not the last committee, but the committee meeting before. So that is now not due for renewal review. The monitor of management's responses to and progress against audit findings at item 10.3, that is actually on the agenda. That's this item. So that's just an anomaly in terms of this body of work. The risk management policy and framework, that will come through to the February meeting after the risk workshop that is scheduled for today, a bit later on this afternoon, and ensuring a review of council systems of control on ethical standards, etc. Is on the internal audit program. We are yet to develop the internal audit program. That will be developed after the risk workshop today, and we will absolutely make certain that the ongoing review of our controls on ethical standards and practices included on the internal audit program. I'll pause there and take any questions.
Thanks, Kathy. That helps by having that identifier on the agenda as well. So thank you for putting that in place. We'll just go to Annexure A in relation to item 2. To me, that's linked with item 4, and item 4, Grant has updated the assumptions in one of the papers that are contained within the report. So we can note that as complete as well and take that one off. And I think that is all the housekeeping, other than at Annexure B, we've got dates that haven't been met. We've got progress dates. Can we have revised dates for completion next time? So you've got your original date, but if we just have when you're looking at having the revised dates on those. Other than that, we'll open it up for any questions or comments. Pat?
Are you anxious?
Yep.
So
Laurie, anything from you in relation to 1.5?
Well, I missed all of that. I didn't have any sound for any of that just then, so I don't know what was mentioned, but I had nothing else to add other than just making sure, as your point around clarity on dates and revisions, just really making sure we know if anything's slippage or anything's deliberately not being done on the program. That's all.
Okay, thank you, Laurie. All right, we've got a recommendation up there. Can I have a mover? Thanks, Peter, and a seconder. Thanks, Laurie. All those in favour? Thanks, guys. That's moved. Okay. What I want to do now is to move into confidence. So, pursuant to section, I'm not going to read that out. I want to move into confidence so we can speak with the external auditors. So if I can have a mover, thanks, Pat, and a seconder, thanks, Peter. All those in favour? Okay, we'll now move into a confidential discussion with the auditors. So I can ask everybody to vacate the room. He shouldn't be here. All right, thanks, Kathy. We're going to move now into the review of the annual financial statements. A very clean set of accounts, so well done, Ron. I think you're the one who's going to take the glory on this one.
Sandra, that one's Sandra.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. The financial statements together, so yeah, great job.
Always take the compliment when it's fine here. But no, thank you to you both. It's a great outcome. What we'll do now is we'll probably run through the representation letter, which I know you're a part of with Justin as well, because that gives some of the background. What I'm used to seeing is this is the way the judgments have been made. This is what we've determined from the point of view of the accounting standard and post balance day adjustments. So you'll probably get some questions, not from the point of view of challenging what you've done, but more understanding of what's happened there. So we'll run through the reps letter and take any questions people may have, and then we'll go to each committee member and ask them any direct questions on the statements, because it may answer other members' questions. So we're not going to do a page turn. We're purely going to keep it at a high level. So if we go to the reps letter, which is on page 80, anything you want to draw our attention to? I suppose the key one being there is the adjustment associated with the grant we weren't expecting to receive. So this is the financial assistant grant. So if you just want to talk through what it was, how it came to be, and the implications on the accounts.
Yeah, so I'm happy to take that one. So we'd actually already reported back to Audit Committee and Council that we weren't expecting the advance payment this year, because that was the position that the federal government had made in their budget papers and the Treasurer had made. However, at the ALGA conference in Canberra, the sort of off the floor, it seems like, the PM declared that they were going to pay the full amount in advance for the year, which I think he decided on that day. And so obviously what it means is, I mean, they had actually told us that they were planning on paying it in advance just in July, so to not stuff up people's accounts anymore. And so really, and then they declared that they'd done everyone a great favour by bringing it forward by 1 week to June, when really we know that it is to favour the federal government's cash-based accounting. So ultimately it means that we've got extra grants in our current year. We were expecting that we would have the adjustment year where we'd have a lot less grants, and then we'd go back to normal state of things. Instead, they've paid an extra quarter and paid the full amount of next year's in advance. And so it has boosted our grant income, but we do have the adjusted operating ratio, which does, the purpose of that is to draw out the timing differences of the financial assistance grant. So that's more of the underlying position after that adjustment. Ultimately, in our budget, we sort of budget for the fact that we will receive 4 quarters each year, and then at some point there will be an adjustment when they decide not to pay them in advance anymore. But you sort of, that's up to the federal government when they finally make that decision. But yeah, so it obviously has overstated our financial position, but the adjusted ratio does pull that out.
What is the magnitude of it? Because I know in the reps letter it says 750 is the additional, but what's the absolute amount that's impacted on the results? Because I think we're at that 929 thousand deficit at the moment.
Yeah, so the actual impact on our current year was about the $1.7 million mark. That's how much 1 quarter extra is worth to us. So yeah, we do get around 6 point something million for the whole year. So obviously our advance payment total is now above, it was around that $6 million mark, but our extra quarter has impacted the current year's ratio operating result by 1.7.
Yeah, because I couldn't tie it back to in your reps letter. You talk about an additional 750,000. That's where my confusion was. So if that's the 1.9, that makes sense. Yep. So where I was looking on that one there was on page. Sorry. Page 93. Right at the top, you got increased by 751,000.
Okay, I might have had the wrong figure in my head. Apologies. I'll go back to note 1.
The 1.9 or 1.7 you're talking about makes more sense.
Yeah, I'd have to look at that. There might have been some other grants in there impacting that. I mean, the 750, we've had some other issue, like had timing differences with the local government, the local roads and community infrastructure ones. So that's impacted the last couple of years. So I don't know if we've sort of intertwined two there. So note 1 is quite good, has a little table in it to the statements which shows
that gives a 1 point, not yet. That the one makes sense, but you've made a representation to the auditors. There's a disconnect there, but if the auditors are comfortable with that, we'll take that. Anything else you want to draw our attention in the representation letter?
I don't think there was anything too significant in there.
Page 86 around litigation. I think before we've talked about litigation from a previous prior of the cafe. So is there any outstanding litigation, or has that been fixed?
It's not that there are no litigation outstanding. There's nothing currently, as at 30th of June, that we thought that there was a requirement to recognise a contingent liability, and I had discussed them with the auditors as well.
Yes, Justin.
Yeah, just adding to the response from grants, the legal matter is actually being now managed by the local government mutual liability scheme. So it's a liability that they're running with. We've got no further exposure. So from our financial statements point of view, there's no need to disclose any further contingent liabilities.
Makes sense. Thank you. Any events occurred post this report going out from management's perspective that change any of the numbers? Not aware of anything?
Nothing material, no.
Just on that page 91 at point 17 talks about a list of unadjusted variances. I'm taking out there is no attachment. So is that a nil report? This is on page 91.
That's right. So the auditors have let us know that they have no material adjustments that they would like made. So there may be some minor adjustments that they haven't asked for because they're immaterial. So any adjustments, there were a number of small adjustments that were made during the audit process as we discussed and looked through testing, but nothing material left. So all material variances have been made.
So the question is there an attachment at item 17 of your representation letter? Because there was no attachment. Is it a nil report?
Yeah, sorry. So that there are no material.
Right. Okay. Okay.
Yep.
So we can just note that there are no changes there. All right. On the representation letter, Laurie, anything from your perspective before we go into the financials?
No, just really just a comment around asset valuation and the the way that's gone up, just how we get to that position, because it's quite a material jump.
Yeah, so if you just want to talk through the valuations.
Yep, so through the
that'd
chair.
be good.
So obviously each year we, each of our infrastructure and building asset classes, we index each year by the local government price index capital index, which is published by Adelaide University on behalf of the LGA. And then obviously every 5 years, each of the material asset classes has a full revaluation and condition rating. So yes, the last 2 years that index has been quite high. So it was 8% for the previous financial year, 21-22, and it's actually 11% for 22-23. But what we found is when we did our transport asset revaluation this cycle, the amount that asset class has increased is actually not far out from the indexation we've applied to all the other asset classes of 11%. So what that indicates to us is the indexation we've been using in the desktop interim amounts seems to be about right, seeing as a detailed valuation has actually come out with a similar percentage increase. So that came out, I think there was a 13% asset increase for that asset class, but a 9% depreciation increase due to some changes in conditions and that sort of thing. So yeah, what it tells us is that our desktop revaluation processes, I think, are using a reasonable index.
Laurie, are you concerned about the uplift?
Well, I'm just probably wanting to understand whether we do consider that when we think of our capital programs, and you know the depreciation impact, and also whether we're actually thinking about how we consider our rates policies, noting the fact that we seem to be having some continual increases on our revaluations. You know, so it's like a double whammy. Just your thoughts as to how you're thinking about that.
Yeah, happy to discuss that. So probably that one, I've put more of discussion around that in the budget review item. But I mean, you're right. It seems like capital increases have been quite significant over the last couple of years, and then while CPI has been high, capital increases have actually been even higher, and that's not, you know, that index is not just for regional councils, that's for all councils. So you'll see in the budget review what we have suggested is an adjustment to our assumption around how depreciation may increase over the next few years, and that if capital increases have been higher than CPI over a period of time, but when you look at the long-term history, they've tended to be quite close to CPI. So we've built an assumption in that depreciation may moderate over the next few years and be, not that it's going to go down, but that it will increase a little bit lower than CPI. So happy to discuss that assumption that we've built in, but that's what we've built in during the budget review. In the budget review item, we've got a discussion.
Yeah, we can deep dive into that at item 2.5, so we won't lose your sentiment on that question, Laurie. So we'll come back, loop back on that one. Anything else at this stage?
No, clear for me.
Thank you, Peter. I did ask you, didn't I? Okay.
No, you didn't.
Didn't? Okay.
The only additional question I have for clarification is, what are we doing with this building in terms of asset valuation?
So the question sits around, we know there is a paper dealing with the demolition or development. So how's that been dealt with in the production of the financial statements?
Yeah, so at the moment, this has probably not had an impact on our financial statements from our perspective. So there's no contracts in place as at 30th of June for the move or for the demolition. So for potential demolition. Obviously, there's a paper included in this agenda about the possible future of this building. Part of our thought process has been around this being a business decision of council. So obviously this building could be renewed and could be a part of our normal renewal program. Council have made a decision around what the course of action they would like to take, but they think that that's not the best use of public money. And then we're looking at the other options of demolition or divestment of the site. And so I haven't impaired the building at the moment. and haven't built in any liabilities, because I think there's still many options open to council. You know, there is still the possibility of renewing the building. There was an impairment actually undertaken last year, so it's not at its original value. It was impaired. It still has a value, and I haven't impaired it further at this time.
So the carrying value at the moment is based on what? Methodology, not amount.
The methodology was undertaken, so that it's had its evaluation done a few years ago, and then an impairment was undertaken in conjunction with the engineers who undertake our evaluations last financial year. And then, yeah, they haven't suggested there's any indication of further impairment required.
So no change to.
Yeah, just normal appreciation for this year.
I wouldn't mind a view from the external auditors on that one. Sam or Kyle?
Okay, we're comfortable that the building is correctly disclosed in this year's financial statements. You wouldn't make an impairment into the financial statements until the financial year in which the building has been destroyed. It's still providing economic benefits to the council, so it wouldn't be until next year's financials that we would look at that. Even putting in a note in your financial statements, I think it's still at a point too soon. As Grant said, you're considering options still. So I'm happy with the way that the building is presented in this year's financials.
Okay, thank you. Patty, you comfortable with that answer? Peter, you comfortable with that?
I am. I'm just off the cuff. Would it not be of benefit for the council to have an idea if it was included in this year, like to have an idea of how the asset would be treated? Would the thought process be that it could shape the council's thinking if we knew now what it could be worth or what the future uses could be?
That's a different discussion than financial statements. That's more around the business decision of what you do with it. And I think that will happen as part of the next steps anyway. This is more around, should there be further impairment, given that there may just be a vacant block of land here at some stage. So that's where we're at that discussion at the moment. But yeah, you're right, from a business decision, all that information needs to be known, because there may be a ricochet into the financials associated with that. Laurie, are you comfortable with the answer?
Yeah, I'm satisfied.
Yep, so am I. It was raised and we've considered it. Pat, anything else from you before we jump into the financials? While you got the floor, is there anything on the numbers, and go page by page where you've got any questions to raise? So we're starting off page 30 forward, 31 forward. And again, this is important, even if there's just clarification, to ask the question if you are uncertain.
I'm not sure if this is the right place to ask it, but just in relation to the grant funding and the amount that was accelerated, shall we say, that have an impact on next year's financials, or is it treated as a windfall, or is it?
We'll grab that one at 2.5 as well. So yep, that's on the list of any ricochet into future years.
Okay. On the estimates,
What page, please?
page 39, I guess I was curious about the fact that it said that the COVID-19 pandemics had an ongoing impact on passenger numbers. Doesn't seem to be the case in any other passenger number scenario. So I'm wondering if it's actually the COVID impact that's impacting passenger numbers as opposed to something else.
Well, I think a lot of regional travel has still been impacted. A lot of airports are struggling to get back up to the numbers they had before, as people maybe drive to travel instead of with maybe a little bit of fear of flying. So we've seen yeah, that while passenger numbers continue to go up, there has been a bit of a downward pressure in terms of getting it back up to where even like 90% of where they were before. So it's not just, I think, normal, because you do get normal ups and downs. I think there has been some downward pressure on passenger numbers just from if you look at the curve.
Well, there should be a new norm at some stage. Yes. Justin.
I think just to add again to that, I think if you did a poll in terms of the community's perception of travelling by air now compared to pre-COVID, you'd get a very different response. So I think there is returning to sort of those pre-COVID conditions is still going to take some time to get there, and people are still making decisions not to use airline travel, in part because the airlines are struggling with their security and with their field staff and grounds people. So the reliability of the airlines and the inconvenience of air travel is much greater now than it was pre-COVID, and I think that does actually influence in part people's decision about whether they jump on a plane or not.
That's fine. I thought the numbers coming through were, for example, with Qantas, that their passenger numbers were higher than they were before.
Wouldn't expect to see that again next year. That
No,
statement.
probably not. No, and obviously you weren't at Adelaide Airport at 5:30 this morning. It was chaos. The number of people.
That's to my point. It's chaos because they don't have the security and the grounds people that they had pre-COVID. So the chaos that you've got now, which is adding to the inconvenience of air travel, is in part due to COVID.
Yes, Sam.
I just wanted to say, just whilst you're on that page, that table at the bottom, and referring back to the management representation letter of the increase in the 750,000, that is the difference with the cash payments received from 21-22 to 22-23. You see the 7,152 cash received this year compared to the 6,401. That's the $750,000 increase, and that's what the management representation letter was referring to.
Yeah, but it's the absolute number that matters.
Yeah, so that's showing the difference in cash. The difference in timing is complicated by, if you ever see the letter that they issue about that the Grants Commission themselves have massive mistimings in their payments, which is being made worse by the federal government paying so far in advance. So yeah, so the 750,000 was the change in absolute amount between year to year, whereas the 1.9 is the actual amount that's in extra in advance because of other background mistimings that are. We could do a fun graph on the thing to show you how it works, but it's quite complicated.
Thanks, but they've been accounted for on a cash basis. So, yep. Keep going, Pat.
Page 45, just the accounting standards. I mean, I don't know very many people at all who apply early, who are early adopters of accounting standards, but I'm just wanting to confirm that the reason we're not adopting early is because it's not in our best interest to do so.
Yeah, I think the one that will probably have I mean, I don't know if it'll be hugely material, but it will affect us in a good way, I think, but that we need to get a bit more clarification around how we're going to apply it. What the government have done for non-for-profits is there was a circumstance where when you were valuing, especially land and buildings previously, you had to treat them at highest and best use. And sometimes in non-for-profits, you could get very unusual outcomes. So I've had examples of councils in Adelaide who have a depot on a bit of land that's not community land, and the building gets valued at zero because the highest and best use would be to redevelop the land and knock it over and build houses. Obviously, the council's never going to do that. They're using it as a depot. So one thing the new accounting standard will allow for non-for-profits and including government is to not have to apply that standard. It hasn't affected us too much, but what it does mean, the small number of buildings we've got on non-community land will be able to value at current replacement costs rather than market value. So we don't have a huge amount of sites. So it won't be a hugely material impact on us. Other councils may have bigger impacts from that change.
Yeah, I suppose where Pat's coming from on this one, Grant, is that the statements made, council has made the decision not to early adopt, where it's really management that made that decision. And what we're doing at the moment is just asking the question, so we are supportive of the position you've taken. So given there's no benefit to us for early adoption is the reason we haven't adopted it. Are we comfortable? Are you comfortable with that, Pat? And I think we note that in the minutes as well. We had discussion on early adoption. I think going forward, that's something that would come to us around before that we get the accounts. This is what we're applying from an accounting standard point of view, and there's no benefit to us just as a learning going forward. So, yep, keep going, Pat, please.
I think any of the other things I had were covered already in our discussion of the management rep letter. And I thought they were a pretty clean set of accounts from what I see. So thank you.
Thanks, Pat. Laurie?
No, same. I concur with Pat's comments on that being a pretty clean set of accounts.
Questions? No? Okay. Thanks, Laurie. Peter? Right, you're going to have a couple from me. And as I said, this is not, I think they're a good set. It's just understanding. So you're going to have to bear with me on this. So if we go to page 34 and we look at the numbers that sit below the operating surplus, so we've been looking at that 929 number, but there are a number of items that then are impacting on reserves that sit below that, which we haven't had line of sight on as a committee. I don't know if the council has had line of sight on. Can you just talk through what those items are? Please.
Certainly. So if you look in the first lot, so obviously this year we did not have any physical resources received free of charge. We do get them every so often where a developer will build a road, a footpath as part of their development approval, and then they'll gift that to council for their ongoing maintenance. So we haven't had any of those this year. We'll skip over the next one. So amounts received specifically for new upgrade assets, that's our capital grants. So they do obviously affect our overall operating result below the line. That's where we get, grants for new assets that we're building. And so this year we've got a few items in there. We've got the end of our runway grant, a grant for some change rooms out at Jubilee, and a few other minor items. As you can see, it's a lot lower than the year before where we had quite a lot of grants coming in for our airport.
So they're mainly capital works?
Yes, those ones there have to be specifically for a project to be classified there. And for a capital project. So then the asset disposal and fair value adjustments. Now I always think this almost should be split into two bits. So what we find is we normally make a tiny profit on our sale of items that we actually normally renew, our plant items. So we're depreciating at about the right rate, maybe a tiny little bit too high, but they're about right. What will skew this, and you can see this from sort of note 7, is we always build our, so we've got obviously very long lived assets, and we'll build the big one in here is our transport program. So we'll build it, have our transport items being renewed in their last couple of years of useful life, but it never lands exactly on year, 50 of the 50-year life. And there's always a bit of write-off as you renew the asset. I think it's an interesting one in my view. In an ideal world, that amount would actually come out of the revaluation reserve. But the way the standards work, you can't do that. But really, those assets, because of the way we revalue over time, they've been depreciated more than their value over their life. You renew them near their end, and then there's always a bit of write-off, and then you start depreciating it again. It's always a bit of a skewed item, especially so it was bigger in a couple of years ago when we were doing a really big renewal program for roads, but there is a bit of a big item in there this year where the same thing happened with our second runway. So we've gone and sealed it. When we've redone the pavement underneath, we've had to write off some of the pavement which got rebuilt. So those ones, they look a bit weird, but there's no other way to really handle them. But I don't think they affect council's overall long-term result or underlying operating position. Obviously, the really big item down the bottom there is our reval reserve, which, as I said, because we've had an 11% on average increase in our infrastructure and building assets this year. We've had a really large asset revaluation amount of almost 41 million.
So what we can expect to see in the future then is that number still to be large and really a decrement on the accumulated surplus reserve because it's not coming out of the asset revaluation reserve. So that's where we're seeing the hit, as you said.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, I think the standards are a little bit weird in that regard. I feel like it should be able to come out of the asset reval, but it can't. We've had that discussion with the auditors previously.
Okay, thank you. We go to page 47. And at the grants, we've got amounts received specifically for new upgraded assets. There's a big variance year on year. You just want to talk through that item, please.
Yeah, so that was that. So the year before we had significant grant funding for our airport. So it was the end of our build of the terminal. So we got the terminal was like funded about 80% of a $6 million project. So there was a chunk of that funding came in there. And then there was the start of the sealing of the second runway, which had grant funding attached. So the majority of that grant funding in our year was actually related to our airport.
Yep, and on the next page, we've got a big variance on the individual significant items, the other. What makes up the other? So previous year at 5.7, this year at 1.2 million. Is that airport related as well?
I think it maybe I might have to just quickly check that one
Okay,
and get to
good.
an answer
Yep.
after, but I believe it may be related to the airport, yes.
We're getting close to the end. Just on the other reserves, so this is page 29. We've got an opening balance, we've got transfers in, transfers out, and a closing balance. What normally sits in those other reserves?
So in this bit, we sort of recognise any grant monies that we're holding. So they've come in and either become an asset but we haven't quite met the grant funding requirements yet. And so, yeah, it's sitting in there and will need to be spent. So just holding it off to the side so that we know that that amount is sitting there.
Does that flush through P&L at any stage?
It will flush through the P&L next year. So obviously we recognise them properly as grants as they get spent, unless there's so that basically we've got the grants that don't really have strong conditions over them, and we just recognise them as grants as they come through. The other ones we'll recognise as we spend them.
Okay, page 65. This was the 2022 year. Just looking at the non-borrowings current, the contracted cash flows and the carrying values are the same. Is that because interest rates were so low, or they weren't charging you anything?
Yeah, we did have we had this conversation quite late with the auditors and have adjusted our workings for this year. The issue we have is that we have a lot of variable loans, and so we had this conversation. Contractually, we don't actually have any. We could pay the loan off tomorrow and not have any extra cash flows. Whereas our fixed loans are the only ones that we have contractual cash flows.
So yeah, more fixed in 23 compared to 22.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Sort of. I'd say we are there. So well done. Just one minor change, if you could. Page 78, if you can just make me chair of Audit and Risk Committee. The signing document. Okay, so I think we will note the management representation letter, given that we went through that. We will note the external auditors report. Now, I haven't gone through that one in detail because it's benign from the point of view of everything was successful. So we'll note that. And then we've got a resolution. So that's a standard resolution, Kathy?
Yes.
I take it. All right. I have a mover. Thanks, Peter. A seconder. Thanks, Laurie. All those in favour? Passed. Well done, guys. Good effort. We'll just note in the minutes our appreciation for the finance team in relation to the preparation of the accounts and the positive feedback we received from the external auditor on the way that was run. So well done. Yeah, Sam and Kyle, did you want to go?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, before you sign that certificate of auditor independence, the date just needs to be updated to 2023. So it says 2022. So just change that, before you sign it today.
Yep. Got that?
Okay. No, I don't have anything else to say, and we're happy to leave.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, we'll move into the item 2.2. Justin, are you going to take this one or are you going to hand over to Grant? Was it one I was looking for you? No. Okay. Yep. Over to you. Page 104.
Right, excellent. So with this report, obviously, quite a lot of information in there. This council obviously does 3 budget reviews during the year. This is sort of acts as the 4th budget review in terms of tying back the original budget to the final financial result. And so has quite a lot of information because it's all of that stuff that's happened during the year plus anything that may have happened during the last quarter. I guess overall, you know, we do know that, and this was reported during the budget reviews, we know that council's financial result has been detrimentally impacted during the year by a number of sort of large items, some of them one-off, some of them being a little bit of an ongoing budget pressure. So waste is obviously was higher and will be an ongoing budget pressure that we'll have to manage. Relocation to air high is obviously a one-off item, or there's 2 lots of amounts that were budgeted for that. The electricity costs have now been flowed through our long-term financial plan and budget, so hopefully won't be an ongoing impact in terms of managing the budget. Interest expenses, once again, I think it was a one-off impact in terms of we just weren't quite expecting the speed with which interest rates went up, but the long-term financial plan does have higher interest rates had built in later years, including from this year. So that one's not an issue ongoing. There was, a one-off move from capital operating due to some spend that had already happened around the Whyalla project that we couldn't capitalise, and animal rehoming has been a bit of a budget pressure that's now flowed through. So council's underlying budget position sort of deteriorated this year, the current year, by 1.7 million. There's definitely, and part of it is our budget is very tight. There's really a lot of room to move in there when things come along that are unexpected. And so that's what we're seeing in managing the budget. It's a challenge ongoing, but I think we took a few hits in there. And as when we talked about the budget review ongoing, maybe there's finally a couple of little good things coming through that might start to offset that a little bit. So it was definitely probably one of the most challenging years I've had to manage a budget in. Obviously a long list of items. There are a lot of other stuff that have happened that we've managed through the budget process like we normally would, trying to offset pluses and minuses, but there were just a lot of large minuses this year that were hard to manage. So happy to take any questions on the.
Thanks, Grant. The numbers are the numbers, so the representation is there, so thank you for that. I think what we'll talk about under 2.5 is really what's been tipped over the fence from what hasn't been done this year into next year, and we can deal with that at 2.5. So I'll just open up for any general discussion in relation to the year in summary. So as I said, I think everybody's very interested in what flows into 24, 25, 23, 24, sorry. And we'll deal with that at 2.5. So Pat, anything from you?
No, nothing specific on this. As you said, the numbers are the numbers. 2.5 will be the tricky one.
Peter?
Well done for managing it with a smile, Grant.
Laurie?
Yeah, I look, the numbers are the numbers, as we all say. The key thing for me is making sure that the messaging is being delivered loud and clear, that you know, it's not an outcome that we can just continue to achieve year on year, and we just need to make sure that there's good information, education, so that decisions are being made, so this doesn't become the norm and accepted. And that may mean you know, either abnormal increases in rates or different levels of activity of service, or finding other ways to you know, offset the deficit as a priority. But just make sure that we certainly get the message across that it's not the norm, and we don't accept you know, an adverse result to be the standard that we're going to achieve in future years.
Yeah, and I think we'll capture that in the minutes, Laurie. That is very worthwhile repeating back to council, even though there's been that windfall and the deficit's a lot lower. Again, it's a windfall, and shouldn't just be taken that everything is fine because we have that windfall. The sentiment remains the same from the Audit Risk Committee in relation to urgency, focus and priority, and the need to look at either re-engineering activities or other revenue sources, being rate increases. That capture it, Laurie?
Yeah.
Thank
Or
you.
you know, there is a growth program that's going on. Really, how do we accelerate some of the incoming revenue from that? Because yeah, we do need to get that message across.
Okay. All right. I don't have any comments. It's more what's been tipped over the fence for me, because you look at the borrowing level to be 9 million favourable. That's a large number that we then pick up next year. So if I can have a mover for the recommendation. Thanks, Pat. Seconded, thanks, Peter. All those in favour? That one's been passed. Okay, we'll go to 2.3. Grant, I think you're still in the hot seat on this one.
Yeah. So I think this one's, one thing I realised I forgot, we should have put this in the second part of the agenda. Apologies, it's only a note for the audit committee, not a decision. We realised that after we issued the agenda last week, so apologies on that one. This one really is about us reporting on our investments and loans in line with our treasury management policy and our requirements under the Act to give you that report on each annual basis. Our actual investments are almost non-existent really. We have our cash account that we use and try and keep at a minimum, and as per our treasury management policy, just pay down loans as much as possible. So we don't get a lot of investment income other than a bonus each year from the LGFA based on balances. Really, it's about our loan balances and just making sure that they are within our target ranges within the treasury management policy for fixed and variable, for managing our interest rate risk.
Yeah, it'd be good to see what the wire is on the borrowings, but I think that was included in the financial statements from memory. So we're seeing that weighted average interest rate go up. We didn't seem to fix very long when you look at the fixed side of it. What was the thinking there? If in hindsight, if we go back, because you were fixing, when you look at some of those, seems to be a little bit 2 and 3 year was a fixed period.
It is at the moment. So when we originally fixed a few years ago, and we did sort of a 1, 3 and 5 at that time. The 5 is now down to probably 2. I think it's been almost 3. And then we've fixed now again for 3. So you're right. At the moment, we only have a 1, 2, and 3 fixed. It was sort of, yeah, our policy is we don't fix for the best interest rate. We fix to manage our interest rate risk. And that is true, but obviously you still do have a little bit of a look at the interest rates when you're looking at your next fixing. And I think that 3 and 5 are about the same at the moment, and there's so much unknown going on that I think we went with that 3-year fixed as a, and also there are some potential cash flow changes coming up with potential sale of land to state government, that sort of things, which may actually potentially bring our borrowings down and mean that we don't need as much fixed borrowings to be in that range ongoing. So I think it was about sort of managing a few unknowns at the moment and not going too far. And 5 is obviously the longest we as administration can fix under the policy without coming back to audit committee and council.
Yep. Again, where you take your position on this makes a difference from the point of view of interest charges. So it's something we can drill in a little bit deeper as we go through as a committee in future periods. So we have the report is there. Peter, anything from you? Pat? Laurie?
No, nothing.
Okay. I'm fine with that. So we have a recommendation there. We have a mover from Laurie, a seconder from Peter. All those in favour? That one's been approved. Okay, we've got a late item at 2.4. So, Kathy, are you going to take this one?
I'll hand over to Irene, actually.
Okay.
Irene's prepared this and I can add any comments as needed.
Irene, over to you.
Thank you, and apologies for the late report. And it was down to timing on my behalf. And so I just wanted to advise that, of course, on an annual basis per our terms of reference, it is a requirement that the committee report annually to council on a summary of activities for the committee during the previous year. So this committee has been commenced in February of this year, and so this report actually straddles two audit committees, an audit committee and an audit and risk committee. And so not only is there your report, but also the previous committee report. So I'll take the report as read and ask if there are any questions.
Thanks, Irene. Yep.
I will note there is an error in the report with Councillor Klobuchar actually being Mr. Klobuchar at the time of the first audit committee.
That's cool. We can fix that up. That's fine.
Thank you.
Laurie?
I'll just note that.
No, all pretty straightforward, that one. Thank you.
Peter? Pat?
Pretty straightforward. I guess in the 23-24 work program, we've listed what we're looking at doing. I noticed we say, oh, that's okay. I just read liaising with the council's external auditor on the end of year financial statements and noted that there was nothing separate. We were actually reviewing the financial statements, but I think it all just fits in there. So that's okay. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
All right. Again, I'll work with management to settle this one here. I think it's also worthwhile. We did give advice in relation to the sale of Nicholson Avenue and the approach to take there. One thing I think we should ask back from council is this is our work program, this is our focus and priority, seeking feedback from council on the value we're adding as a risk committee and any areas for focus and priority as well. So feedback loop back to us on our performance as well on that one, Kathy.
Yeah.
So we have the recommendation that sits there. Do I have a mover? Thanks, Pat. Seconder, thanks, Peter. All those in favour? Okay. And we'll settle that one and get it out to the council. All right, we'll move back into item 2.5.
Scott Way has just, or is just about to join the meeting to the service review items. To deal with that now so that we can be a part of that discussion.
To change the agenda?
Change the
Do you like
agenda.
to get approval to change the agenda?
No, just with the law.
All right, Scott's just
Oh,
joined us.
Did you mean?
Yes.
Scott's just joined us, so what Kathy is recommending, we go to 2.7. Comfortable to change that 2.7? All right. We'll go to 2.7. So Kathy, do you want to handle this?
Yes, thank you through the chair and welcome to the meeting. Scott, just bear with me. I will get my item up. As the committee is aware, council has appointed BDO as our service providers for service review and internal audit services. Part of that program of appointment and part of the previous discussions of the committee and also of the council, we have identified 3 service reviews that we are wanting to undertake in the early stages of this program, following which we will then also develop a service review program over a 4-year period. That service review program over a 4-year period will take into account council's risk profile, different pressure points, cost points, etc. And so that service review program will be developed during this first 12 months. However, given BDO have now been appointed and we do have 3 areas identified as being of key importance to council, whereby either service efficiencies and effectivenesses could be made, or a different decision in terms of whether or not the service is actually provided by council or not. These are matters that need to be investigated fairly quickly. So those 3 items are the operations of the airport, the operations of childcare services, and our open space services. Scott Way was in attendance in Whyalla a couple of weeks ago and met with the executive management team as well as the managers of the service areas to get some understanding in terms of the service provision from them and what the shape and form of the service review might take. I will pause there and Scott, is there something that you would like to add in relation to each of the scopes that you have provided here today for consideration?
Good afternoon, yes, good afternoon, folks. Thanks for inviting me along. I wasn't sure, Kathy, whether those attending today had read the briefs, so I can talk to the briefs if you like. But I think you summarised it.
Yeah, assume everybody's read it. So
okay.
Papers are out there. So more if you want to take us to anything specific in relation to those briefs.
No.
Okay, that was short. All right, what we will do is open it up for discussion. We have previously identified those 3 areas. Pat, I might go to you first.
Okay, we start with the airport review. I guess it's a bit of a chicken and egg scenario. This seems to be saying that we go talk to other people and ask if they're interested before we actually do any work. My understanding of negotiation processes is that you're actually better off having some idea what you want to do yourself so that you can frame what other people decide what they want to do. And my preference would be, therefore, generally, that you would actually do some work before you went out to work out whether that's something that is in Whyalla's best interests, and then that frames how you might sell it when you approach things to other parties, or you might decide not to, because otherwise you might end up having approached them and then realise down the track that actually you're not getting a great result from this because of the way they want to do things or because of the numbers. And if you've got information in relation to the numbers or parameters from a Port Lincoln or or one of the other airports, that could assist you to actually at least do some preliminary work first. So generally, if I was going into this sort of thing, I would probably want to be slightly more informed before I just went, hey, guys, do you want to do something aggregation wise? I think you would end up with a potentially better result that way, although you're front ending a little bit of work, and others might say, well, you don't want to do the work if you don't want to do the work, but if you don't need to do the work. But often you can actually, I guess, impact the outcomes if you do the work beforehand. So that's my overriding view in relation to the airport review, because, you know, obviously at some stage there's going to have to be considerations of what you do to make it more efficient in any of it.
I might hand
And
over
it's
to
not covered.
I might hand over to Kathy on that one, then take other committee members' views. So Kathy, I'll let you talk through that one.
Yes, thank you.
I'm
Through the chair.
happy. I'm also happy to respond, Kathy, if you like.
Yep, I'll maybe if you want to go first. I mean, yes, over to you, Scott, first, and then I'll follow up from there.
Okay. Yes, it's a reasonable comment. I suppose after visiting all of the sites and speaking to all of the managers, we then sat down on the afternoon of the day that we were up there, and we sort of tried to then draft out these scopes so that they met the particular need. One of the things that emerged in the discussion around the airport was that we thought that it was potentially two projects. And so we chose, rightly or wrongly, to go for the more strategic of the two first, followed by a more traditional service review second, depending on the outcome of the first. The outcome of the first, I suppose the focus of the first, I should say, was to see whether there was an appetite in the market for an aggregation of the airports, in principle, from some of the other regional airports as the potential for either I think it's a section 42 or 41 subsidiary organisation, not dissimilar to an East Waste as an example, or for sale, in other words, by aggregating the airports together, that there was a potential for a sale or some sort of management approach that might be more attractive to a pre-existing airport operator who could then either cross-subsidise or amortise their costs over larger airports with the smaller airports. So I take your point. It would be useful to sort of go into an activity with some of that information, with some background information. Some of it's there already, in the sense that it's a dramatically underutilised asset that's costing you money pretty much every day, that's currently unattractive to at least one of the other operators. So that we don't need to verify that. That's clear, I think. So that was the rationale for stage one, stage two. If there was no appetite for stage one, then we could comfortably go into stage two, which is then looking at the operations of the current airport and trying to find either ways of reducing cost, which I think we've identified some already, as it turns out, or areas for increasing revenue or utilisation of the space that you've got so far. So that was the rationale, but happy to vary that if there's a strongly held opinion in the other.
Thank you, Scott. If I can add to that, I'm thinking that in the progression of this project, perhaps it is actually three phases. Phase one being to do that initial investigation into the viability or not at a desktop level as to aggregation of the airports with the information that we do have and what information we can gather to present and develop a small business case in the first instance as to whether or not it is going to achieve if it is a worthwhile model to pursue, and then move to seeking information from the other councils as to whether or not there is any appetite for an aggregation. So yes, I think in taking that feedback on board, I think we can take this project scope to be in 3 phases instead.
Yeah, my view on this one, Kathy, is I wouldn't go down to business case level. I think this is,
Yeah,
and
high level,
probably
high
back
level.
to Scott's position is, I look at these similar to the way you approach a merger. You want to know broadly your position before you go and speak to the other party, rather than saying, shall we just get together and then work out the detail? I think the key is around, well, what's the proposition or the opportunity? Because we want to make sure we're the net winner in this process and not take on just smaller airports that causes us a bigger problem. So I think you need that forward thinking piece at a high level around what's the proposition or the opportunity, so you're aware of where those touch points may be with the other party around getting them excited about aggregation, because they can see value in this discussion. So I'd frame it at that higher level. Laurie, I'd be interested in your thoughts on that one, given your background.
Yeah, I'm probably a bit with Pat. There are 3 different objectives that we're looking for under each of these particular pieces of work. And so let's just make sure we're clear as to strategically what the end game we're trying to get to is. So open space is a completely different outcome, I would assume, with compared to, say, the airport. And the way you articulated the 3 phases, Kathy, is much clearer to me as to why we're doing it and what we're trying to get out of it. I also look at the budget that's been set aside for each of these things, and if we're going to try and do all things for all people, we're going to run out of money pretty quickly. So let's tighten, what we can deliver and how we can deliver it, and what's going to be most meaningful for us. For me, the first one is very much the strategy of are we better off by going one way versus another. The second one might be, is it a transaction? And the third one's around optimization of policy, etc. So let's be very clear. I guess what I'm trying to say is what we're going to get as a deliverable for each of those services, based on the best available use of council resource that we've currently got.
Peter? All right. Pat, do you want to keep going?
Up to
We've done the first one.
the childcare centre, just again, obviously at the moment that's sucking money from the council in a rather large way. I think it sort of says in the project background that you're looking at whether, in the project of objective, it sort of says you're looking at the merits and demerits of continuing to own and operate. But I just want to make sure when you go down to project outcomes, it's just saying explore the options for the operation of the childcare centre. I want to make sure that options includes concept of selling it to a private operator. Because I just wanted to make sure that was in the thinking.
I think the exit and sale piece needs to be in there, both components. Walk away as well as sell it. So do we want to be in the business of childcare centres? The question.
That is absolutely part of the scope of the review. It is from that one end of the spectrum as to, is this a service that council wishes to be in terms of delivery? And if not, then here's the methodology for a divestment. If yes, here are the efficiency and effectiveness principles and improvements that need to be made.
But so long as that's clear to everybody, and I'm not sure whether that could be just
we'll capture that in a minute.
Clear in the project outcomes, then I'm happy enough with that. Looks like Laurie's got another view.
Yes, yeah. Laurie.
No, I was just going to say, is that not something that management should be doing and putting forward? No, I'd say, on you, Justin, as the chief executive, taking a position as to where we think we should be going with the childcare, and using the piece of work to either validate that position or otherwise, rather than, act as if we're starting from sort of a position of zero. Because I think, within council, we've got enough of the history as to how it operates, what the issues are, what the risks of continuing to operate are, and what the opportunities are. And maybe we could, move it forward a little bit and tighten the scope around perhaps where we think the best position should be. That's what I'd be thinking.
Do you want to comment on that, Justin?
No, I think everyone's pretty much saying the same thing. The purpose of service reviews is to determine whether we're going to deliver the service and then how best to deliver that service. At the end of the day, I don't think anyone will question that there is public value delivered from childcare services. It's critically important, particularly for our city, given the nature of the workforce and the businesses that operate here, that we need a highly effective and functioning childcare service delivery model. The market is in the process of changing. So where in the past council has probably felt obliged to deliver childcare service in the absence of market operators delivering it, I think we're on the cusp of significant change, and I think the childcare sector will respond, as will other sectors. So I think everyone's saying the same thing. We want to explore whether council should continue to deliver childcare services or not. And if not, how best to deliver it. Back to Pat's comment, the project outcome, which is to identify the merits or demerits of the future funding model, I think was trying to imply that we want to look at and similar to scope and approach, identify the merits and demerits of the future operating models and options, was about looking at which is going to deliver the best outcome for our city and for our council.
Yeah, but again, you look at the project outcomes, and that's the second part's very much around continued service and look how more efficient you can make it, or make sure the service delivery is there. Is it as simple as look at exit or sale of childcare facilities as the project scope? And once you make that decision, if you're still in the business, well, then you look at how you improve it. But the first bit is the exit and sale side.
If I can, through the chair, certainly when the executive management team were discussing this project with Scott from BDO, similar to the airport project, it's in two stages. Basically, and consideration of whether or not we're in the business moving forward of the delivery of childcare services or not is the first decision point coming through this. If the decision then from that consideration is to continue in childcare services, then it is how do we actually operate those childcare services in a way which is delivering public value, in the context of delivering on good service level standards, compliant in terms of the regulatory environment that it operates within, and also at a cost point that is, ensuring council's competitive neutrality, and also that it is not a draw on ratepayers funding inappropriately so against the delivery of other services.
Yeah, Laurie, I think you were past that point, saying we shouldn't be in the business, and the previous discussions around with management is they don't think we need to be in the business either. What are we going to do about it? Is that where you were coming from?
Correct. It's not like we've got unlimited resource here, and I'd just be saying, if we think we should be taking a position, then we should be putting that forward, and then best using our resource how we can to help get to that position and justify what we're thinking is in best interest of council.
Because I was getting a different position probably from you, Justin, more around the services needed from a community point of view. We are doing it because there weren't providers around there at the time. There may be new providers in the marketplace. There may not. We need to go and look at, can somebody facilitate those services?
Yeah.
Is that where you were coming from?
It is, and it's using the analogy before, it's the chicken and the egg. We need to ultimately go to council at some stage with a recommendation, which is either to continue or cease delivering childcare services. We're working on the assumption that the market, the private sector will respond, and that we would be able to divest ourselves of the childcare service, but we don't know that for certain. Back to, the intent of the service reviews was go back to first principles. Should we be in the business of delivering childcare service? Yes or no? And then if so, what's the best way of delivering that service? So we've probably taken an academic, theoretical proposition to service reviews more broadly, to the point, if we believe that we should get out of childcare services, we need to provide a report to council to get endorsement to go down that path. Council's endorsement has essentially come through the service reviews and wanting to explore whether we should continue to deliver the service. If the view of the audit committee, audit and risk committee, is that we probably need to just cut to the quick, we need to go back to council in the first instance and seek a resolution to actively explore divestment of and cessation of this service.
Why can't you do it anyway as part of that first stage in the service review? Because you're not committing council to anything.
Yeah.
And we have looked at divestment, and is there other service providers?
Yeah.
Here is what is on the table. So I don't think you need a resolution from council to do your service review.
Yeah, and that's, as per the discussion to date, the project scope that's in front of you is looking to essentially answer those questions, possibly in a two-stage process, as Kathy's mentioned. Ultimately potentially arriving at the same outcome, which is if we think there's greater public value from council not providing aged care services, then we'll arrive at that decision.
Yeah, because I'm seeing that on page 159 that what is the exit sale option? There's the first one, phase one. Phase two is, well, if you're still in the business of it, how do we make it more efficient? So, and there's a checkpoint at the end of stage one of, okay, we reaffirm we're still in the business of it. So I think that captures Laurie's issue as well.
Yep.
Laurie's probably a lot more further down the path from where management or executive management and probably the audit committee are probably behind Laurie at the moment. Or sorry, not behind him, but together on what's the best way of divesting interest in childcare, but still making sure the community needs being met by a service provider. All right. So again, I think that one there is just split between the two with a checkpoint after the first stage. Back to you.
Yeah.
Anything on the final one?
No, just on that. I mean, it says that there are 11 providers, 11 other providers or 11 providers. So I think just make it clearer that it's a stage one, stage two.
Yeah.
And I guess that then gives the management the material that needs to go to council one way or another in relation to divestment or otherwise. The next one, I take it, is really about finding areas where there's significant expenditure and consideration of whether that expenditure needs to continue, and to what level it needs to continue. And I guess, ultimately then you need to work out how you fund it going forward if it does need to continue. I noticed that there are certain areas that are excluded from the service review, and I assume there's good reason for that. For example, the foreshore, the playgrounds, the street furniture, the cemetery and the leisure centre, I suspect because they're already covered elsewhere in other things or have had recent projects associated with them. But other than that, I was okay with that service review.
I guess by way of introduction, in terms of this service review, the city has extensive open space areas. There is extensive budget and funds that go towards the maintenance of our oval playing fields, in particular Bennett Oval and Memorial Oval. We also have Jubilee Park within the portfolio, but in particular with Bennett Oval and Memorial Oval, Bennett Oval is maintained at AFL standards in terms of football. Memorial Oval is maintained at standards, which allows for state level cricket. Is that correct, Grant? And so one could think that the potential for those two assets being maintained at such high levels, when it is potentially, and they are not potentially used to any great degree, if that's an over servicing of those particular assets, that then cost the ratepayers of this city in excess to what the service level standard is that should be being maintained at those ovals. So it needs quite some review in terms of what are the service levels that are relevant for those assets for the City of Whyalla in terms of its utilisation and public value delivery. The other element of it is all of the other areas of open space, the verges and the parks and gardens and so on that we maintain. We don't have service level standards necessarily, or we haven't had any more recent conversations around what are the service level standards that we want to project in this city. Are there areas or identified streets that we want to have as a higher service level than other streets? What are the main thoroughfares? How are we actually maintaining those? How are we using our open space budget? So this service review will have a look at all of that, and will be designed to ensure that we have the conversation with members of the community who are the users of the facilities, and also the residents together with the council in terms of what are the desired service level standards. Once we actually reach those service level standards and an understanding as to what they are, we can then ensure that the resources are deployed, both financial and physical and human resources. So this project is probably the largest out of the three, in the context of body of work, and it has the potential to have great impact in terms of the way that the city is presented over time.
Laurie, did you want to comment? Or are you just waving at me?
I'm good with that one. That one's clear.
I suppose you cleared it up for me, Kathy, because I was looking at service standards when you're really talking around servicing.
Correct.
Yeah. So that now makes sense to me. Is what's the quality of each of those activities and the level of effort that will go into it in the future. So it's not really a service standard as such. That's
a term that we use in local
government. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I get it.
Yeah.
Peter, anything from you? Okay. We have the comment in relation to the change or proposed changes in the stages for the first two items, or the recommendation on that. So to me, subject to inclusion of our feedback, which is up there. So we've got the recommendation up there. So do I have a mover? Thanks, Laurie. A seconder. Thanks, Peter. And that one's passed. Thank you for that. We look forward in getting on with progressing that service review. Thanks.
Scott.
Sitting in the big chair. Thanks, Scott. We'll let you go.
All right. Okay. Thanks, folks.
What time do we want to have a break?
Now, if you want it. She's here.
Yeah, we might take a break now. So, do I have a mover for a 15-minute break? Thanks, Peter. Second to Laurie. All those in favour? We'll break for 15 minutes. Thank you.
All right, so thank you through the chair. So obviously this is council's first quarter budget review. Purpose of the first quarter budget review tends to be more about picking up the impacts of the year end and financial statements. Obviously we pick up any other material variances, but this time of year doesn't tend to be too much evident in the budget analysis. Probably the biggest items, obviously we've got the carry forward of any capital items that weren't previously identified during a budget review last year. So obviously at the third quarter budget review, we do a review of where our capital budgets are up and do our best estimate of where the spend will be at 30th of June. But so there's some other adjustments that come about during that last quarter. So picking up those with operating budgets. So don't, normal process is not to roll forward operating budgets unless they're for a specific project that sort of relate to a council resolution. So there's a couple of items this year. So I've got the big one being the relocation. So that was some of that money was budgeted last year, but we weren't quite as far along at 30th of June as we expected with that process. So there's most of the carry forward of operating budget relates to that item, and then there's a couple of other items around our the movement of junior soccer to different locations. So there's a council resolution relating to that support, and that's an operating nature. And then one other item in our asset area, so the demolition program, which will have a bit of timing difference over the years. It's almost a bit of almost a capital project that sort of has to be go through our operating budgets. So those are the three operating items coming forward. And obviously with those, while it makes our operating position worse this year, it's obviously made our operating position better at the end of last year. So when I spoke about that $1.7 million worse operating position last year, that took out the impact of any, so took into account as if those operating items had occurred. They hadn't, so I've just carried them forward to this year. And then the other big item of an ongoing nature that's come through is depreciation impacts. So that 11% increase in asset values was higher than we were expecting and projecting. And so that has had an impact on depreciation going forward. In year one, that impact is about 400,000. It's offset by our runway depreciation being a lot lower than expected after that project finished. But really the impact on council excluding airport is 400,000. And so as I mentioned a little bit earlier, one of the other items, what we've built into the ongoing assumptions is a moderation in depreciation capital, cost of capital over the next few years. So not a decrease in any respect, just a increases a little bit lower than CPI, which based on what's happened over the last couple of years, you would expect some sort of moderation over a number of years, as historically capital values have gone up in the long term in line with CPI. And so some of those pressures in the market with labour and materials would hopefully start to flow out a little bit and see lower increases over time. I guess with that one, we have time to sort of view it over the next couple of years. It's a non-cash item. Obviously, it does start to impact our renewal programs long term, but we've got time to sort of see how that assumption flows through and whether we do need adjustments in rating or other service levels if that doesn't start to eventuate. So that's the big item there. And then obviously overall, what we tend to find is when we bring through our year end, we would hope that our long-term borrowing projections are pretty similar to what you saw before we got to year end. Here, the item that's probably impacted on our borrowings in a positive way was the sale of the YTech building at 30th of June. So while we were going through those negotiations, we hadn't built that sale into our budget. It occurred on 30th of June. So you'll see that our peak borrowings sort of about $1 million lower. And the impact of that sale on reduced depreciation and interest actually funds some of the savings program that we had built into the plan. So we built in that over the next few years, we would start to see savings from this divestment of some buildings. As I said in the report, that was built in all as depreciation because most buildings that we divest of is giving them to someone else through a lease arrangement or something similar. Obviously, in this case, we're actually able to sell the building. So we've got a mixture of interest and depreciation savings, which sort of add up to about 150,000 ongoing by year 3 of the plan. So that's assisted with, the things that council have been trying to build into their plan and finding those savings from those items. But yeah, so borrowings you'll see are better over the term of the plan because of that sale. Just answering a question from earlier about how does the early payment of the financial assistance grants impact on it? So sort of in terms of how I build the long-term financial plan, I always assume that it's just easier to show from an operating perspective that we'll get our grants for in a year. You never know what the federal government are going to do. So it's just easier to show it that this is our operating position. And if at near the end of the year, it's going to be different, we can adjust it out then. But what I do is adjust the balance sheet so that our projected borrowings show as if the federal government aren't going to pay that amount in advance, because I like to show what our peak borrowings really are going to be. And at some point the federal government will make the decision not to pay that grant in advance. That's why they're doing it. They're manipulating their operating result in effect. And so I've built in the balance sheet that we don't get the grant, and that our borrowings actually show what our real borrowings are if we don't have that amount in advance. Yep. Yeah, so the operating revenue assumes that we'll get the grant, 4 quarters of the grant in a financial year.
So
that's right.
So they pay us more this year.
They have. Yep.
This assumes that that's permanent. It same benefit, I'm not saying benefit, but normal grant. Next year, why would
Because then every budget review, you're explaining the difference between an operating surplus and an adjusted operating surplus. I think it's less complicated to show it in there. The balance sheet is assuming that we don't get it. So we're, from a borrowing and interest rate perspective, I am assuming that we don't get it built into the balance sheet, that we will not, and our borrowings. It's just in the operating. It's just, I mean, that's the whole point of the operating ratio, the adjusted operating ratio. But I think it's just easier to not be trying to explain it every single time, and that when they make that announcement, we'll show it in our operating, and we've built the risk. Well, but it's not real. Because our adjusted operating ratio will just become what our operating ratio is now. That's the whole point of our adjusted operating ratio, is that yes, last year our result was better, but we actually should, what you should be looking at is the adjusted operating ratio, not the operating ratio. That's why we have that built in there. As I said, I think from a budget perspective, when people are looking at it, it's just less complicated to show it in every single budget review, like a huge gap. And if they don't pay it, yes, our operating result will be worse, but our adjusted one won't be. But our borrowings won't be any worse off than we're currently projecting. But that's actually why I do it, so that because I don't have to explain that to them. It's more complicated, I think, to explain. Well, I don't think it matters, because when we're talking the adjusted operating result, the actual operating result being worse because they don't pay that doesn't actually matter. It's the adjusted operating result that's it. So it's easier when they're actually the same in the budget, and then at year end you just explain it.
balance sheet?
Yeah, so the balance sheet builds in not getting it.
Yeah, but you'll get like it's in there. So therefore, everything pays that money. But it's adjusted in the rule. Balance sheet. So there's potential surplus will be higher. That adjustment. So you'll afford.
Yeah, so.
Is on higher. And your recommendation will be that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there is nothing council can do about it. It's we are at the whim of the federal government on that cash flow item. And then the last item, just for opening it up, is very late last week we got our information around what that federal grant might look like for this year, because while they pay the full amount in advance, they don't know what the full amount is for the new year until they've done all their budget estimates and papers. So it looks like we'll have a higher amount ongoing in that grant. So in terms of how we come through to the second quarter budget review, we'll look at how that impacts our long-term financial plan. And so, it's nice to actually get a positive, instead of a negative in some of those. So council, there's quite complex calculations that go on into that grant allocation. We are sort of on an upswing over the last year or two. And as there was a big jump in the amount of grant money available because of indexation this year, we sort of jumped up closer to where we actually should be and had a bit of an increase, and that'll flow through over the plan. Yes, and it was 460 operating carried forward, and 350 of that was the part of the relocation as well as, yep. Good question. One thing I will say, our carry forwards have reduced slightly over the last couple of years. We are coming down, and part of council's budgeting for this financial year during the thing was about not overcommitting to what we could deliver, and keeping that capital program quite simple. Obviously, our renewal is sort of what it was, but our new upgrade was a very specific and only a small number of projects. Will we, so we're looking at this year probably a $15 million capital budget now. We could deliver 15 million. We have done it a few years ago. I mean, the nature of it is, I think there will always be some carry forward. Some of the projects will always have hold ups for one reason or another, grant funding, hold ups, stop points. So there always will be some carry forward. I don't think you'll ever get to a point where there's none. Long term, I think our deliverable of capital projects is probably around that sort of 10 to 11 million. That's probably what the max we should be delivering. So we are over probably what we would like to be delivering. As a percentage of this.
Adding things that are adding, so you have depreciation, cost that comes through, some revenue may come through. But we now have a deficit of 3.2 million.
Yes.
So the number keeps going up. At what point is that? The amount can't go higher. Roll in the next, but we then just accept position. So I think we and Laurie touched on that sentiment around how to continue to live on deficit intervention. Council, yes, it's at what point council go above that now. Going to go back to budget. That might be interesting. Pat, did you have a view?
I think it's the same as the view that you've expressed. Yeah. And it's probably a view that we've been expressing for a while.
I think it's a very relevant point that often goes pushed in the background of, just where is that ceiling for, and from a councillor's point of view, and not having a full comprehension of the numbers yet. But it just, it can become accepted that it's always in deficit. I remember your comments about breaking the nexus between CPI and our current position. I chicken and the egg thing. Who says what? Do the administration tell the council, or does the council finally say, hang on, well, we're noticing this is going in a direction that we don't want it to go in? And again, as a young councillor, I'm not sure where that point is. So I'm reassured that you guys are saying, hang on, someone has to call it where it is here and draw that line. So I'm very interested in where that line will be drawn.
Council has actually called it already in the deliberations of this year's budget. The council made it clear that next year's budget will be cut by 25% capital works and 25%, I think, in the leadership costs. 2 years, sorry, on the basis that if things didn't improve in that time frame, that was where the adjustment needed to be affected. So that's not next year, the year after. So 25, 26. So currently we've got that handbrake ready to be pulled. Whether we need to pull that sooner is something clearly from the feedback from the audit committee the council is going to have to consider.
And the first review to kick it up by such a large amount. I know the depreciation side doesn't impact on your cash flow, so there's still cash coming in, but it's more the underlying result as well. So Laurie's not there, so we'll capture that sentiment. But are we? I don't think we've got any room not to recommend it because the number's the number. Other than put those sentiments where we think re-engineering activities and a review of what options are there to reduce the projected surplus or deficit back to budget. So are we comfortable with that? Can I have a mover? Thanks, Pat. A seconder, thanks, Pete. We accept the recommendation. Okay, we'll move into the annual business plan and budget. So, Justin, you going to do that one, or hey, Grant, are you going to do that one? So this is at 2.6, 148.
I'm happy to talk to it. So obviously this is bringing to the Audit and Risk Committee, just starting to, plan for next year's budget. Just finish financial statements and off we go again. So what this is sort of in line with the process that we've followed over the last few years, is starting to talk about early on about planning for the process itself, but also the items that will form the discussion and the parameters moving forward. So I think there's been a little bit of in terms of the timing and stuff like that. If when we talk about the audit committee meetings in a later item, if they change a little bit in terms of the April meeting, we'll just adjust and tweak this timeline as required. So just be little bits here and there, moving a week or so. So it's flexible enough to move those items around. We've got flexibility there. I guess in terms of the actual items that we've got in that process, just looking through whether they're considered to be appropriate. So some items there, and whether they're for discussion with the Audit and Risk Committee or whether some of it's more council's feeling on it, is around, for the past few years, we've sort of held 2 public information evenings. We sort of started doing that. So there was one early in the process, one near the end. It's probably worth having a discussion around whether that's considered to be valuable still, having both of those. Obviously we've held focus group sessions for the last few years now, and just I think elected members have always highlighted that they get good value out of them. Did it a little bit differently last year just because the consultant that would normally help organise those fell through at the last minute. So I still, whether there's still value in that process and whether we probably maybe go to a different provider to start getting a different pool of people pulled into the possible attendance at those focus group sessions. But I think it's just highlighting that what we do is in terms of our public consultation process includes a lot of extra stuff. Like we go above and beyond what's required in the Act. I think the elected members enjoy that and see what we get out of it. It's always tricky to get people to get involved in your budget public consultation, especially with positive feedback rather than maybe the more negative sided. But yeah, so that's the process is fairly close to what we've had over the last couple of years. And just in terms of that process, maybe a little bit of commentary from the elected members last year. I think now that we've got a new chamber and they've been through one budget process, maybe having a bit more of a discussion around what our operating budgets look like. Not necessarily maybe going down into the minutiae, but seeing what things do cost us and what and service reviews definitely help with that. But I think it's good having that next layer down picture, maybe for elected members, so we can see what we provide them during that operating budget deep dive. In terms of the parameters, so obviously there's a whole bunch of things that pull into our annual business plan and inform it. We've got sort of 7 parameters that we had for our budget last year, and I'm not suggesting at this moment any change in those parameters. I think they are what we're striving towards. I mean, obviously the one of our big items is reaching an operating position in the long-term financial plan for council, excluding airport, by 26-27. Is that one that is probably the struggle at the moment to meet, and whether that's probably a good discussion point during the budget. Is that what do we need to do to maybe get to that? Can it go one more year as it currently is in the plan? That's part of the discussion point. I did add that the way we've been speaking about that parameter lately is that it is for council excluding the airport. I think and so I just added that wording in there to make that very clear. So happy to take any questions and have any discussion on this, and happy to take the audit committee's feedback on anything that might be needed in the process or the parameters.
Yeah, I might open this one up first, and then I'll go to members. Just reflecting on what happened this year and our feedback and comments, and then council's ability to absorb that and then deal with it. The time frame was very short. I think us coming into the picture in April, the numbers have been set, or the framework's been set, and there's not a lot of influence we can or comment we can make for the council then to review and reconsider. I think the Audit and Risk Committee needs involvement at that council endorsed budget process and parameter side. So at the parameter side in December, where there's discussion around what are the budget parameters, what sits in the long-term financial model for 24-25, what are those assumptions? Is this piece sitting out there around where we want to be at break even, excluding the airport? That's the point you'd have that discussion, because in the end, you take those key parameters away and form the budget. It makes your job a lot easier. Bringing us in April, again, it's a frustration point. I'd take it for management as much as the council, because we're raising issues that you guys don't have time to consider or say, yep, we've thought about that and we've discounted it. By coming back in December and being part of that parameter setting, or at least saying, have you thought about this, this and this? It gives greater time for that to think through. So we'd like, what I would as chair like that to be taken back to council, for council to consider the early involvement around that parameter setting or parameter discussion, at least, around our view on what needs to be considered at that point. Because I think that would be a more effective outcome for you guys as much as the committee and council. So Pat, I'm interested in your view on this.
Yeah, most of the audit committees I'm on will go through the budget timing parameters assumption process in November, December, before things are moved more or before the budgets are set in February, March in those cases. and it's not that the committee devises the parameters, it's that the committee is presented with, this is the proposal for what the parameters are, and then we provide that feedback, which then can go to council, for example, for their consideration. And
And the executive management as well.
that's right.
Yeah.
And that's probably the most efficient way for
Just-
that to occur in terms of making sure that council's got and management have got the benefit of any comments from the audit committee.
Just to clarify, the budget parameters that are in this document are the ones that we're asking the council to recommend, the audit committee to recommend to council. So they're the overarching high level parameters, and if the audit committee think there need to be different ones in there or more, we definitely want to hear that. I definitely think it's good as well for the audit committee to potentially be involved in some of those early discussions with the council as well. But yeah, these parameters are the ones we are proposing to put to council.
Yeah, but when I talk parameters, to me, at that meeting in December, if that's the time, you'd bring up, here's 24, 25 out of the long-term model. So this is what we're seeing at the moment with these underlying assumptions that sit with that, as framing how you then go and go deeper and put the budget in place. That's what I'm talking about, the budget parameters, is at that level around, we've already got a work program with these numbers. Okay, let's challenge that. Are we still comfortable, given what we know now happened this year, that that is a targeted position we want to do? Or is there some other re-engineering activity we want to look at? That's the discussion that happens in December, is that deeper dive into 24, 25 for the longer term financial model, because that should frame your budget. Is that still relevant for us in the current environment?
I think you're actually both saying the same thing. So just reiterating essentially Grant's, what Grant was saying, this is the opportunity now for the audit committee, knowing what's in our long-term financial plan and our current assumptions, to wave a red flag if you think council needs to consider alternate assumptions and parameters for next year's budget. So,
and we're saying yes, and have been saying yes. So
yeah,
it's
So-
it's how deep we go in with council at that in December, when you go a little bit deeper with the council on those numbers.
yeah, so that's where the point of difference is. We're asking you now, what input do you want to put into that discussion with the council in December? As opposed to, I think what you're saying is you come along to the discussion in December and you have that discussion. We're asking you now as an audit committee, what input do you want to have into that December discussion with council?
I suppose where we're coming from, we want to sit down with the council members and give our view with the members as they go through the assumptions and the outcomes, rather than saying, here's parameters, go away and think about it.
Yeah.
We're saying we don't want to set your parameters for you, but as you consider them, we'll give you a view on, are they appropriate or should something else be considered as part of that? A bit like we did with the rate increases.
So given that conversation, I think we need an alternate recommendation. And I think it would be something along the lines of the audit committee having a joint workshop with the council regarding the budget parameters
In December.
on or before December.
It might be,
Can I-
could be
can I-
later than that, because I
Yeah,
think in December, all we're doing is really framing that high level process. So it's these parameters that are in this document and the timings and stuff like that. So maybe in between December and March, where we would, or late Feb, where we would normally kick off with the council, that's where we
yeah.
have.
Can I mean, this report that is presented to you today in the context of the parameters is pretty much what will go to the council in December. It's not a deep dive conversation down into the actual numbers and reviewing. There is in February, March next year, a series of workshops that are scheduled with the council at which the deep dive down into the numbers will be undertaken. So I'm wondering whether or not that series of workshops can be reworked into then delivering the joint conversation between the audit committee and the council. So we are on the schedule of meetings for the council schedule, for the audit committee, scheduling one for the 5th of February. So it might be at that meeting of the audit and risk committee that we curate a workshop between the audit and risk committee and the council to do that deep dive down into the parameters and the setting of those high level numbers around the annual business plan and budget.
So I think the recommendation is that recommends the council the proposed process suggestions, yep, comma, with consideration being,
I think that's fine. Incorporating the comments, suggestions,
A joint workshop
Yeah.
at the,
joint workshop on the parameters prior to the full budget
Yeah.
process starting.
at the February, or in February, or at the commencement of the budget
Parameters
process.
prior to the formulation of the budget.
Yeah.
If I may, then I think part one of the recommendation needs to remove reference to the parameters. Because I'm hearing,
Word, a different, but do we
Yeah.
use,
yeah, I'm hearing the audit committee say that they want to have detailed discussion with the council regarding the framing of next year's budget. Our parameters, we use that word, our parameters frame next year's budget, and the audit committee saying they want to have a conversation with the
we're using
council.
the word differently, so I think it's assumptions.
Yes, your
They're parameters, yeah.
yeah, your
So
on
no,
the assumptions. Well, let's put on the financial assumptions. That's what you're talking about
Yeah.
there.
With financial to before assumptions. Yeah. Yeah.
Peter, you. All right, I'll put that, a mover from Pat, seconded from Peter. All those in favour? Laurie's not there. So move. Thank you. Now, council may come back and say no. That's the recommendation. 2.8 business continuity plan. You gonna take that one or
Over to Irene.
Irene, in your hands.
Hi, thanks everyone. I'll take the report and the plan as read, noting that the intention of the plan is to provide a first reference point in the case of a business interruption or a business continuity event, with the objective of the continuity plan to be to identify critical functions to council and its business and to minimise the impact of the functional business lost to stakeholders and community members. And I'll take questions.
Okay. All right. Peter, any questions, comments?
Nothing of value that I can add.
Okay, thanks for your input. Pat.
I don't think I'm in a position to go line by line or word by word through the plan, but I noted it's very comprehensive, which is a good thing. There is some duplication. We've got, for example, things included both under the procedure and under the management team, like control centres and media briefing centres and stuff. Probably you should try and avoid duplication because it just makes the document longer, and the longer the document is, the harder it is for people to use. I also noted that I'm not sure that the Audit and Risk Committee appears anywhere much in here, and it's certainly not applicable for all business continuity events, but there are some where you probably should be making contact with us.
just on that one, when will this plan come back to the ARC? Is it an annual review?
Yes.
Okay. So again, if you can take, because I don't think you're gonna have time to look at that prior to this going to the council, but look at where the new Audit and Risk Committee, based on our terms of reference, fit within the BCP around escalation and reporting. You can take that as an action. Yep. Keep going.
Secondly, just in relation to media, we should have only one point of contact for the media. And
So this is where you've got both the chief executive and the mayor. So the feedback there is to look at one point, which is normally the chief executive.
secondly, I don't know whether it's something that's worth considering, but most organisations I'm aware of have on tap a corporate communications type or media type entity. And it doesn't actually cost them any money or very, very little money to have them on top, but it's an organisation that knows your business pretty well. And then they're very quick when times are required to help you with the public statements.
So this is on page 181. So consideration be given to the benefit of a PR agency being on standby, and that's something probably for the chief executive to make the call on the appropriateness of that. But in other organisations, it's always good to have somebody to bounce that off against with the strategy. Yep, keep going, Pat.
And I guess, I mean, in summary, it's comprehensive, it's not perfect, but these things get perfected after testing. And I don't think I can say strongly enough, you need to make sure that you have some scenario testing around this. You will find the gaps when you do that.
So the annual test plans will come up through the ARC. Yep. Anything else, Pat?
I think that's probably summary.
All right. I think Pat's captured those. So subject to consideration of those points, we're recommending the report to council, knowing that you're unlikely to deal with those prior to this going up, but that can be the takeaways for consideration. And when you talk through this with the council, you'll have our minutes anyway to talk through this as our feedback on those. So consideration. So do I have a mover? Thanks, Pete. Seconded, thanks, Pat. All those in favour? That one's passed. Well done.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, I'm not really an observer.
Sure. Okay, thanks for your attendance. All right. So we'll move into 2.9. So at 2.9 is for our meetings for next year. And this is where we talked about two potential consideration points. One is for the 8th of April meeting. Given that Easter falls prior to that meeting, it's more the management's ability to generate their reports. And then on the 7th of October meeting, scheduling a meeting after a long weekend and having considered the financial statements is a bit of an effort. So if we're looking at whether to bring that forward or push that one out, and also putting the joint workshop with council, not when we're considering financial statements, but potentially when we have a lighter load on. So Kathy, did you want to talk through the 8th of May?
Yes, just through the chair, if we shift the joint workshop with council to the February meeting.
Yep.
If we shift the 8th of April meeting to the 15th of April.
Yep.
The following week.
That's a Monday still, is it? Yep, that's 7 days. Yep.
Yep. And if we shift the October meeting to Tuesday, the 1st of October, the reason why it's on a Tuesday and not a Monday is so that we ensure that we meet the cycle required of meetings for the Audit and Risk Committee.
Yep. Can you just cut that to coincide up into the one, please?
No, just the bracket.
Just the bracket.
After the February.
Yep.
Yep.
Up to Feb. Yep. Then we got 15th of March, 6th of May, 15th, and Tuesday the 7th. Okay,
Tuesday the 1st.
first. No good. Going to be the second.
Yeah, Wednesday.
Do it on the Wednesday? Yep.
So second, okay. I can have a mover. Thanks, Pat. Second, thanks, Pete. All approved. I think the chief executive gets time to chat to us now.
Yeah, and in saying something, I'm going to say, I'll take the report as read and happy to respond to any questions.
Peter?
Nothing of value. Apologies.
Pat? Okay, so we're on page 237.
Sorry, it's good that we've got a report that says that we're complying with all our internal control frameworks, I suppose. And I guess the external auditors indicated they hadn't identified any internal control issues. I'm used to often getting something which actually shows what's been done to assess.
So there's probably 2 points to this. So we do an annual review, self-assessment of our internal financial controls. And so that's done under the better practice model in line with what we need to do in the Act. So we'll bring that to the February meeting of the Audit Committee. What this report is, and we've probably actually brought this one in a little bit early. So under the new requirements under the Act, if you don't have a internal audit function, and we don't, while we meet all of our internal financial controls, and we have like an officer who does internal financial controls, we don't have an official internal audit function that's wider within the council and sits outside of the financial area. And so this report is required under the new legislation if you don't have that. We've sort of done it as best practice now, even though we're about to start the process of having BDO provide our internal audit function as a wider area. So we're sort of like just trying to meet those new requirements, best practice. The CEO delivers this report on an annual
So
basis.
it's the last time this will happen.
Correct. This report won't come through again.
Let it go. Okay. I was saying with Pat, what's it actually telling me? But I have a mover. Thanks, Peter. Seconder, thanks, Pat. And that recommendation is accepted. Culture.
Probably similar to the last comment, the report addresses the subject of organisational culture. Probably one thing I just want to highlight is that whilst we have University of SA with a formal 3-year program looking at organisational culture, which is across the whole of the organisation, we also do 360-degree feedback for the CEO and the directors as part of our executive performance management framework. And through my recent performance review, the feedback through that process has identified some improvements required in terms of prioritisation, collaboration and leadership for the organisation, and all of those things can contribute to entropy or negative energy within the organisation if they're not all humming well. So through my review and in turn the director's review, we will be putting more focus on some of those challenges that we have as an organisation. So just added that for extra sort of context. Happy to respond to questions.
Yeah, thank you for that. I suppose we're new to this process, so it's a bit hard to look at. The numbers are moving in the right direction, which is good. Are they moving as quick enough to where we want them to get them? It's hard to tell from here because it doesn't have the benchmarks. or what we're trying to achieve. I suppose the key outtake from my perspective is from a risk culture point of view, is there anything within the survey that assists in understanding the risk culture within the organisation, and what are some of the positives and negatives from an outlier point of view? So if you could probably take that away, and if there's anything relevant to the risk committee specifically that we can extract out the survey, that would be of value to us. So probably not an urgent one, but in the next couple of meetings times, if there's something sitting there, I think it'd be worthwhile for us to have a look at that.
Probably, happy to come back with some supplementary information. I'll just respond initially by saying University of SA does this sort of review across a number of other organisations, including councils. So we do have the ability to look at some benchmark data. Probably two key observations. One is that our results are very good compared to other councils, which is a positive. And they're remaining reasonably consistent and at a positive level. So in terms of the potential risk environment, when you've got reasonably happy, for want of a better term, staff, the level of risk in terms of it is reduced, but we'll come back with some more information. But
if there's anything risk specific, I think it'd be worthwhile having a bit deeper dive into it. And again, it's not the next meeting or the one after, it's within the next period. I think it's worthwhile just understanding that. Pat?
3.2 out of what? 5. And then 5.7 out of what then? Because I initially thought 3.2 must be out of 5, and then I looked, well, how can you get a 5.7 out of 5? So maybe it's out of 10, in which case it doesn't feel that good. But if you say that there is benchmarking possible, it would be interesting to see what the benchmark for that number is, circumstances. But it used me a little.
That's a good observation.
I have a bit of a suspicion that there are different rating scales for different parts of the survey. It's an interesting, it's an interesting survey.
In which case, I mean, the difficulty is that doesn't actually tell you anything.
No, that's right.
It might tell you a direction, but if you're at 3.2 out of 100, going up to 3.2, 3.3 isn't.
I always like the reading of the tea leaves on these, where the people who do the survey then read the tea leaves and tell you what
they do, but they haven't really.
This is just a summary of outcome for each item.
That's
so
right.
I think if there is something there to share with the committee, that would be worthwhile. Not today.
It's certainly a work in progress in terms of analysing the survey outcomes and over a period of time and plotting it over time. So that's a body of work that we are in the midst of doing. We're in the midst of developing a understanding what are the causal factors of the outcomes that we've actually achieved, and then what is it that we need to do to pull levers of change in areas that we need levers of change. And that will be mapped over on a time scale so that we can actually understand how the organisation is changing and improving over time. So Sue King, as our Manager People and Culture, is working on that process, and as part of the strategic management framework, this is the body of work that will start coming through. I mean, this is about how does the culture contribute to organisational performance, over time. So
but we don't have the sign markers at the moment,
and we don't have it yet. We're still in the analysis, but what we wanted to bring this report to the committee to actually start that reporting coming through as a matter of better practice. Now, this isn't a legislative requirement, but we have included it in the Audit and Risk Committee's terms of reference, in recognition that in so many of the royal commissions and reviews into major organisations, it's all about culture.
All right. So I think we in the body of the minutes will capture where the limitations around our ability to comment on it based on the discussion. But are we comfortable to then make that recommendation to the council, Pat? We're noting it, yeah. We're just noting it. Peter, okay,
I did have one point actually on this one, just to get the total number of survey respondents, just to get that greater context.
see what participation rate is.
Yeah, because I can
always key.
imagine, yeah, like Pat was saying, if it, whatever the context of the score might be, but also how representative that might be of the percentage of the administration staff that have actually, and I can imagine that's a challenge getting them to fill something like that out. But that would, I think, increase our context.
Okay, 3.1, we have the information there. Oh, hadn't I done that? Okay. Mover, Pete, seconder, Pat, pass. Okay, 3.1. I think we're wary of how these work now. Laurie's still not back, I take it. Peter, any sorry, Justin, I cut over you then. Did you want to make any comment? I think it tells the story. Peter, anything from your perspective? Pat?
And we're spending an awful lot of money on our move to the high school. Maybe not a lot, but a fairly large sum. And there's this sort of comments in there that indicate we're either there for longer or shorter term than we thought, but I couldn't work out whether it was longer or shorter, because of things that were happening. Not sure if that was in that part of the paper or a subsequent part of the
I think that was in 3.2.
So, although, I mean, that's not about the procurement itself is fairly straightforward.
Okay, we'll deal with that one, then we'll move into 3.2 if you like. So I have a mover, thanks Pat, seconder, thanks Peter. That's approved. So we'll go into the demolition side. Did you want to take this one? Gonna give me whiplash.
So this information report is presented to you for information purposes. The council, as you know, needs to relocate from this building due to the state of the building being such that the recommendations from engineers is that it be demolished prior to or sort of in the vicinity of July 2024. It does create a risk profile in terms of its current state of dilapidation. The council has a 2-year lease with the Education Department with a 2-year right of renewal on that lease at Dairy Peppercorn rental for the Edward John Eyre High School. In order for us to move into the high school, there have been some building works that needed to be done to convert classrooms into offices. The primary works that needed to be done were the installation of some different areas of doors, the review of all of the mechanical and engineering and airflow, etc. It's different requirements in terms of office accommodation. So we've dealt with the shift of the administration over to the Edward John Eyre High School. We then need to deal with what do we do with this particular site moving forward. As I mentioned, engineering reports are such that the recommendation is for the site to be demolished or this building to be demolished prior to or by July 2024. Rather than going out and demolishing and then having a vacant site and looking at what to do with this particular site into the future, we are considering, or council has considered and resolved to go out to do a prospectus out to the marketplace, which is offering this site in its current form or as a land-only site. We'll present the different options in the prospectus documentation to test the market as to what the interest in this particular site is. Council will, as part of those discussions and negotiations, will be open to discussing with any prospective developer that we would be a anchor lessor in any development that occurs here. And that will then, of course, resolve council's accommodation needs in the long term. council, this land is not community land, it is council-owned land, so we're not tied by any community land requirements under the Local Government Act. Council also has another piece of land on a street called Ekblom Street, which is also council-owned land that is not community land that we are bundling into this prospectus to see if there is any interest in that site, because it could possibly be that if there was a development at that Ekblom Street site, again, council could consider being an anchor tenant in any development that occurs there. In parallel to the prospectus body of work, we will also go out to seek early contractor involvement in the actual demolition of this building. So if there is no interest or interest in this site as it currently stands that is worthwhile for council's consideration, we still need to get this building demolished by July 2024, and so we will put in place the means for council to actually do that demolition by that time. So we're going out in parallel to basically have two bites at, you know, at different cherries to ensure that we actually get the outcome that is necessary by July 2024, which in essence is to make sure and ensure that this building and this this land parcel is safe, is the highest order outcome that is seeking to be achieved. Secondarily then is council's accommodation needs and also the development of this site in a way which is delivering public value for the surrounding environment and the city. I'll pause there and take any questions.
Yeah, you've articulated a way forward that the council has approved, that
Yes.
way forward. How was that formed, that way forward view? Was that through internal consideration, or was there some type of external input into this is the way we should go about handling this?
Internal consideration across the organisation, albeit we have had over the last 12 months, 2 years, different external parties, you know, talking about and providing information to us in relation to development of the city and the manner of development and the manner of going out to the market in terms of development of the city moving forward. Not specifically relating to this land parcel, but you know, certainly that advice can be overlaid and looked at in terms of the position that we've landed.
I would recommend a health check on your approach that you're looking at. An organisation like, and it doesn't have to be this organisation, but MRS Property, who are independent property advisors and investment and asset managers, they specialise in commercial, but they work with the entity on what you're trying to achieve. This is the type of options that sit with you. And they have done the larger end of town in Adelaide as well. So with the Australian Central Savings and Loans, their Flinders Street development was around, they own the property, but they bundled it up to a developer to then have a lease back on that property. So they might be able to inform you, is your steps the right steps, or are you potentially causing yourself a problem with what you're doing? So it's that health check side of it. I'd go and seek some independent advice. This is what we're trying to achieve. Is our sequencing right? And again, I can provide you their contact, but it doesn't have to be them. I'll just go and sense check what you're doing, given the materiality of the numbers we're talking about. Pat? Peter? Okay. Again, we note that part of the advice piece sits within the minutes themselves. So we have a mover. Thanks, Pat. A seconder. Thanks, Peter. That is passed. Okay, I think we're going to move into a confidential session under section 93 CD. Another mover and a seconder. Mover is Pat, seconder is Peter. We will now move into the confidential side.